It's the Brad and John Show.
And it's the Brad and John Show. Today is March 3rd. It's the first show of March for us because yesterday and the day before, 1st and 2nd of March, were weekends. We don't do a show on the weekend, although John keeps bugging me. Brad, can we do a show on Saturday and Sunday?
Absolutely not. You're giving me way too much credit.
I go, John.
And by the way, on Saturday and Sunday, that's the time to go out to the transmitter, Brad. Risk life, limb, and electrocution in a miserable, painful death by climbing a transmitter site.
I was there both days, John. Matter of fact, yesterday.
Now, you were out there technically hunting coyotes, right? But then you just happened to be doing a little bit of work on the transmitter.
No, that's a different transmitter site. Yesterday I was at two different transmitter sites, and I poured concrete yesterday. It was actually fun.
Wow, nice. Yeah. Now, let me ask you a really technical radio question real quick. Do most radio stations spend as much time at their transmitter sites as you do? You get what I'm saying? Or like why are you so frequently at the transmitter sites?
Well, it's one of those things that it's sort of like I learned the lesson back in the day when I was flying helicopters that the guy who was head of maintenance at the time was called Mid-Coast Aviation. And at the time they had a contract with the federal government. They were maintaining some of the Army's helicopters. And he said to me one day, he said, if you maintained your car the way we maintain this aircraft, you get 1 million miles out of every car. And matter of fact, and Alan Barklage taught me something very interesting, which on any aircraft, you know what the most valuable part of any aircraft is? I don't care if it's a Cessna 152 or it's a Boeing 747. You know what the most valuable part of an aircraft is?
No, I don't.
The data plate. In other words, the manufacturer's plate that shows, that it was manufactured under FAA certification, and it has the manufactured date, it has the serial number. Because you know why that is, John?
No, I don't.
Because if you have that, you can rebuild any aircraft. If it's absolutely, positively, totally destroyed, you can rebuild it if you have that data plate. Now, the problem on that is, in most cases, it would just be, extremely expensive to do it. But I remember when I was still flying helicopters, the Robinson helicopter, which is now very common, they use for training, the original R-22, since they were a new concept in small, light helicopters, you could not get them insured. There were no companies that would insure the helicopters. So Robinson had what they call hull insurance. So if you crashed it, and hopefully you survived it, but you weren't killed, if you brought that wreck to Robinson, they would rebuild it. Essentially what they would do is they would just build another helicopter and just pull the data plate off of the wrecked one and stick it on the new one, and that was your insurance. So you paid for that. Essentially that was their thing. So it's once again, it's called maintenance, John. I mean, and plus I'm doing some upgrades and things like that. And quite honestly, it's one of those things where I sort of enjoy doing it. I mean, it sounds weird, but know, I'm a hands-on kind of guy, I've always enjoyed cutting grass. I mean, I can tell you, it's amazing. There's stupid things I can remember about my childhood. I can remember one night I used to cut my parents' grass, and I used to take great pride in cutting my parents' grass. When I was when I was 10 or 11 years old, and I think I was probably 13 or 14. One night I'm in the car with my parents, and we're driving, and they had a rear entry garage where you went down behind the house, and you turned around, and you had the garages were in the back. And as my dad went, as his headlights scanned across the backyard, my dad stopped and backed up a little bit, and he goes, "Missed a spot." There was a spot
nice.
Where
you missed a spot over there. To quote Stacy's mom, you missed a spot over there.
Missed a spot over there. And I thought to myself, I can't believe I did that. I took great pride in doing that. So the very next morning, I go out, fire up the lawnmower, and I redid that spot. So it's one of those things. Now, the interesting part of that is that there is a philosophy, and it's funny because you bring this up because I thought about it this weekend. There was a point in my business career where computers, and keep in mind, I started my traffic network business in 1984. And I went and bought from Sears Business Systems, which at the time was a division of Sears. They're gone. In Clayton, of all places, on Forsyth, I can still show you exactly where the place was. I bought my first IBM PC, which started my business. It had 2 floppy drives, 5.25-inch floppy drives. It had 56K of memory. It had a monochrome monitor and no hard drive. And I paid $3,600 $100 for that computer. Now, what was interesting was I just like fell in love with computers, and oh my God, this is the future. This is what's going to happen. Over that next 6 to 7, maybe let's call it 10 years, there were times when I met with executives at radio stations, and you never ever saw a computer in an executive's office. And one executive, I can tell you exactly what it was, because I remember him telling me the story. At the time, I was doing business with Cybertel, which was one of the two cellular companies. It was Southwestern Bell Mobile Systems and Cybertel. And I knew the guy there who was the CEO of whatever he was, the head guy, general manager. And I said something about, got this new, at that time, this would have been like maybe 1989, 1990. And I said something, I said, you don't have a computer? And he said to me, no, I don't have one in my office on purpose. And I said, why is that? He says, it's the wrong image. And I said, what do you mean it's the wrong image? He says, secretaries use keyboards, executives do not.
Oh, nice. I like it.
And it was like, and I said to him, okay, so in other words, it's just a visual thing? And he says, I don't want to put myself on the same level as a secretary, because that's what secretaries do. Secretaries.
I like that. Now, for context, did you say this was still in the 80s?
Would have been maybe late 80, 88, 89, could have been even 1990. I can't remember the exact date.
Well, I mean, that was true at the time, right? Like, you don't want to be one of those dames that's in the secretary pool.
But see, the interesting part of that was that, think about it, it wasn't necessarily computer keyboards, but up until that point in time, you would never see an executive with a typewriter in his office. Let's go back to the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. You would never see an executive with a typewriter in his office. Maybe you would see an occasional one who was like sort of an oddball kind of guy. But that wasn't. And remember, one of the things that if you talk to people, especially women in my age bracket, there were quite a few of them that graduated from Miss Hickey's School of Business. Are you familiar with this?
Yeah. And so I only learned about this when one time I was making fun of Sanford Brown, using them as a punchline, and you educated me on but remind me who they were.
It was a place, I believe it was Richmond Heights. I think it might have been actually right on Clayton Road there, near where the theater is. And it was a school where women, and there were no men that went there. There could have been a guy, but I knew women that went to school there, graduated from high school and went to Miss Hickey's. And essentially you learned secretarial skills. You sharpened, if you didn't know how to type well, you learned how to type better. You learned how to do shorthand, which was very important because of the fact that when an executive was going to send out a memo, back in the day before we had email, you would bring your secretary into your office, and you would dictate to her and she would write it down in shorthand, and then she would go out to her office. She would take a little notepad, a little steno notepad, remember the stenographer's notepad, and she would translate that in, and she would type it into her typewriter. She would go back into the executive's office and show him that, and then that would be put on the Xerox machine, and it would be distributed throughout the office, because the executive did not do that. He was not the kind of guy who would do that, and now what's interesting about that is that that's gone, because everybody uses a keyboard, everybody uses a smartphone. Everybody uses some kind of an iPad or whatever they call the tablets what are the tablets called on the
Windows system. I don't know the name. They're often on NFL sidelines because they have a deal. Windows has a deal, or they had a deal with them.
Right.
So and that's the origin of the saying when you were talking about dictated. One of my favorite phrases, one of my favorite arrogant corporate phrases is dictated but not read. I love that phrase. Like from an executive, like, I'm so busy that I dictated this to my secretary, but I didn't have time to read it. So what you're saying, Brad, is if an executive had a cute secretary, most of the time he would prefer that she did like short, quick strokes and not long, slow strokes.
That's John Combest.
For shorthand, for when you're taking dictation is what I'm saying. You want the hand to move quickly, short strokes, and not like long, slow strokes.
Are you into The Office? Do you ever watch The Office?
Yeah, the British version and the American version.
Okay, there's a what do you call it? Compilation. What do you call it?
Compilation, yeah.
Compilation online of every time he says that's what she said, and one of them is where he's being deposed. Have you ever seen this one?
Oh yeah, I have seen that.
And where the attorney asked him a question. Did Miss so and so say this or was said? And he says that's what she said. And she gets it, and she sort of rolls her eyes and gets aggravated. And the attorney's like, I don't get it. And he says to the stenographer, can you read that back? And so she reads it back, and the attorney says, is that accurate? And what's his face says, yeah, but he says something, but she didn't quite, the intonation wasn't correct or something like that.
Yeah. Now, as a callback to our 8 block, Brad, when we talked about Bishop Davidson, the origin of the phrase, that's what she said. True story. You know the origin of that?
I've heard this before, and I think I've heard JC explain this because that was one of his favorite things, but that's what she said.
Yeah, because the origin, it's a British phrase, and the original one is said the actress to the bishop. So it was the same thing as that's what she said. And I've also heard it as said the queen to the bishop. So in other words, in British humor, you would, as a wacky punchline, and then that got added to, Wayne's World. He started saying that's what she said. And then Michael Scott, of course, popularized it on the American version of The Office. But yeah, the original phrase is said the actress to the bishop.
Really interesting. And that's from British theater?
No, it's just a British slang term. A bunch of blokes probably having a few, a little tipple, and then a woman would, say something, and they'd say that said the actress to the bishop.
Whoa, a tipple?
Yeah, a little tipple. A little tipple? Like, what's your tipple?
What is Tipple?
Yeah, that's what the Limeys call alcohol.
Oh, it's a drink?
It's like saying what's your drink of choice.
You have a tipple.
Yeah. Like, hey, Brad, you want to go? Hey, I'll use a Brad phrase. Hey, we just yelled at each other in the courtroom in St. Louis County. You want to go to CJ Muck's and have a tipple?
John brings up my I haven't eaten there in a while. One of my favorite places to eat, and they used to be right across the street from the courthouse until they tore the building down for the county jail along with the old KSLQ studios. But by the way, can I tell you something? And
yeah, you're going to finally admit that the reason they tore that building down is because they had an exorcism and they still couldn't get rid of the spirit that was Brad Hildebrand.
I have something that I've decided I'm going to sell, but I'm not going to sell it for a small amount of money. I'm going to put
your soul.
No, I've already done that. I'm going to put it on Facebook Marketplace for $1,000. You know what I'm going to sell?
I'm ready. I want to hear what it is. I
have the KSLQ Visible Vault.
Okay, I don't know what that means.
Back in this would have been, I'm going even further back. This is before we had issues with the executives not wanting to have a computer keyboard in their office. This would probably be 77, 78, 79 and through there. The original KSLQ, where I worked, we had a promotion where we had a $10,000 cash giveaway. And what they did was we had a company build a Lexan Visible Vault. It is a cube with a door on it that has a keypad on the front of it, and they would fill this. And we're talking it's somewhat heavy. Matter of fact, when I pick it up, it probably weighs, 50, 60 pounds. I have that vault. And what they did was they took this out to shopping centers, and they would say, hey, today at Crestwood Mall, stop by and see if you can get the $10,000 cash. And literally, the station, I remember the way this worked, we had the Visible Vault that was brought back to the station, and it sat in the one of the offices, and it would go out to one of these shopping centers. And these hired security, and it wasn't a security guard. They actually were hiring plainclothes detectives because they did not want to make it look like we actually had a security guard there. But we were hiring plainclothes detectives, and his job was he had the bag that had $10,000 in cash in it. They would go to the shopping center. They would have a table that they had specially made. I think they had like a truck or something. They transported somehow like that. It was on wheels, and it had two eyes to like these bolts that had an eye on the top of it. And when they would put the visible vault has two essentially prongs on each end, which were made up with these eyes, and they would padlock the visible vault to this table so nobody could just run by and grab the vault and be off with it. And people would line up. Sometimes the line would be literally hundreds of people, and they would take their shot at typing into this little keypad, like a telephone keypad, what they thought was the combination for the vault. And if you hit the combination for the vault door opened, and you got the $10,000 cash.
Did anybody ever win?
Well, what they did was it was a simultaneous promotion where they did it on air, and they gave clues. And so finally, the people that were at the mall, for the most part, they were just taking wild, WAG guesses at what it was. But if you followed along as people would give the combination on the air, they would say, the disc jockey would say, I think it was a long combination, it was like 12 numbers. And the disc jockey would say, okay, you have 4 correct. So there was these people would sit at home and they would write down the guesses, and they would say 4 correct. And then they would figure out by elimination which were the right and which were the wrong guesses. And somebody actually won it on the air. They didn't actually win it in the thing. But I have that visible vault. It is in my possession, and it's really in very good shape, and I'm going to put it on Facebook Marketplace for $1,000. Write a little history of it and see what happens. It's actually, I'll send you a picture of it. It's actually pretty cool, and it's aged well. Sometimes Lexan and today. And I'm not exaggerating. If you were going to hire someone to build this thing today from Lexan, and it's thick, it's like it's not like thin Lexan. It's probably 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch Lexan panels, and it's all buffed up. It's nicely put together, and all the seams are nicely there's no crazy weird seams that are not aligned properly. It would probably cost you $4,000 or $5,000 to build this nowadays. I mean, the Lexan alone is probably a couple $1,000s, and then someone's labor to do it, because that stuff's not cheap.
Sorry to interrupt, but wouldn't this be like a popular thing for giveaways at like a chamber of commerce? Like, couldn't you haul this into like, I don't know, an old Hickory Country Club and like do like maybe a cross promotion with a local chamber of commerce? They would probably be open to that, right, Brett? Like maybe they would want to lock you inside of it.
They could maybe lock my foot inside of it. It's not that big.
Oh, okay. I thought it was a big thing.
No, I'll send you a picture of it. It's once again, it's a piece of radio history, And at the time, this was a big deal because people go. I mean, once again, some of the shopping centers, literally, there were hundreds of people in line that stood in line and it was sort of interesting because it wasn't all $100 bills. It was a mix of currency. It was like a bunch of $100 bills, but it was 10s, 20s.
Yeah, some pesos, some money from the USSR. And about real quick, what year was this, Brad?
It would have been 77, 78, 79, and through there, maybe 1980.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's 40 plus years old. 45? It's probably 46, 47, 48 years old. And like I said, it's still in pretty good shape. It's not cracked or anything. I'll send you a picture of it.
That makes one of us. That makes one of us from the late 70s.
And I'm not going to say exactly where it's at right now because of the fact that if I did, I know someone would try to rob me and get this because it's...
Yeah, but thankfully you have some plainclothes detectives. And you met the guy because he pulled you over on the highway.
He didn't type the right number of letters into his computer. Okay, say goodbye, John.
See you guys tomorrow.